Here is everything you will need to make our last and biggest baby Claire Beanie. This is the toddler size, and it is made to fit heads with an 18 to 19 inch circumference. After this size is just the child size, which is the original Claire Beanie pattern, but you drop a hook size. So super simple and is already available on my blog and on my YouTube channel. To make the toddler size baby Claire Beanie, I'm going to be using worsted weight yarn from Hobby Lobby's I Love This yarn in the color Sun Gold, a pair of scissors, a J or 6.0 millimeter crochet hook. This is Clover Amore brand, which is my favorite hook brand to work with, and I highly recommend it, and a tapestry needle for sewing in your tails. Gauge for this size with this crochet hook is 13 stitches by 13 rows. Will give you a 4 by 4 inch square, all single crochet stitches. To start this pattern, we are going to make a slip knot and then chain 10. We're going to single crochet one time in each stitch back down for a total of 9 single crochets, skipping the first chain closest to our hook. So we're going to start right here and single crochet back down for 9 single crochets. That's 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Once we get back to the end of the row, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. You will chain 1 and turn your work after every row during the brim portion of this beanie, and that's the portion that we're working on right now. This one starts at the brim and works its way up. For rows 2 through 44, we're going to single crochet 9 in the back loop only. So instead of putting our hook under both loops like we normally would, we're just going to go under the back loop and place our single crochet there. And we're going to do 9 single crochets all the way down. Chain 1, turn your work for a total of 44 rows. Be careful when you make your chain 1s after each row that you don't make them too tight. If you do, your brim will not stretch properly and it won't fit the suggested head size. I will come back after I finish my 44 brim rows and we will take a few measurements so you guys can check your gauge. Finishing up my 44th row in the brim. And then I'm going to chain 1 and turn just like I have in all of the other rows. And let's go ahead and take a few measurements. Our brim is measuring about 15 3/4 unstretched, almost 16 inches. Could be 16, depends on how you adjust your brim before you measure, but stretched is the more important measurement. It needs to stretch to fit around an 18 or 19 inch head circumference. So let's see where we are at. All the way over here to 22 inches. That should make it fit snug enough to stay on the toddler's head, but not too tight that it feels like it's cutting off his circulation. And you know what? I haven't done this for the other sizes, but I'll do it for this one. Our brim is about just under 2 inches in width, if that's something you'd like to know. I'm going to insert our hook back into our loop there that we left, and now we're going to start the body portion of our beanie. And to do that, the first thing we need to do is close up our brim. So I'm going to fold the brim in half and line up these 9 stitches with these 9 stitches, and we're going to slip stitch them together by putting our hook into the first stitch of the first row, the first stitch of the last row, grabbing our yarn and pulling through all of the loops on our hook. That gives us our first slip stitch. Now we're going to go into the second stitch of the first row, the second stitch of the last row, pull through all for 2. We're going to do that all the way down for a total of 9 slip stitches until our brim is completely closed, and makes a circle. And our last slip stitch, chain 1. I'm going to pull my tail on the inside like that. That's just personal preference. Chain 1, and now we are going to flip our brim right side out, and you can tell which is the right side because the seam you just made is going to be on the wrong side, aka the inside of the beanie. That way it won't be seen. Now for row 1 of our body, we are going to single crochet 49 stitches all the way around the brim. We have 44 rows, so to get to 49 single crochets, we're going to have to increase 5 times. I just like to place mine in 5 random spots around the brim. It doesn't matter where they are as long as they're not all next to each other because that'll make your beanie wonky. You will be working on the raw edges of your work, so you will have to make spots for your hook to go and your stitches to go, but we will do a few of them here together, and then I will do the rest off camera. I'm going to put an increase right here, which just means 2 single crochets in the same spot, and remember we got to do 5 of those total, so that's 1. We got to do 5 more all the way around for a total of 49 single crochet stitches. Then I will come back and we will start our puff stitch rows. After we finish our 49 single crochets, I'm going to join into the top of our first stitch and chain 1. Now we are going to start our puff stitch rows. The first puff stitch is going to go right here in the same spot where we just did our chain up 1, right up next to the chain. Going to yarn over, insert our hook into the spot, grab our yarn, pull up a loop. That's 1. We're going to do that 4 more times back in the same spot. Yarn over, insert, grab, pull up. That's 2, 3, 4. Then we're going to grab our yarn and pull through all the loops on our hook to complete our puff stitch, and then we're going to chain 1 to secure it. Next, you're going to skip this stitch right here, so just leave it empty and put your next puff stitch into this guy over here. Pull through all and chain 1. We're going to do that all the way around, putting a puff stitch in every other single crochet for a total of 25 puff stitches in the row. Okay, last stitch on row 2, which is my first puff stitch row. Going to chain 1, and now I'm going to join into the top of the first puff stitch we did and chain up 1. Now for row 3, we're going to put our first puff stitch all the way over here in the chain 1 gap we made after making our first puff stitch from row 2. So instead of going in the same stitch where our chain up is, we're going all the way over here in this gap instead for our first one, and that will help our seam stay nice and straight up the back of our beanie. We will just alternate back and forth where our first stitch is going to go. Continue to put puff stitches in all of the chain 1 gaps from row 2 all the way around for a total of 25 stitches in the row. My last puff stitch is going to go right here. Join into the top of our chain right there, and then chain 1. Now for row 4, which is our third row of puff stitches, we're going to start back in the chain 1 gap right up next to this chain 1 again. Continue putting 1 puff stitch chain 1 in every chain 1 gap from the previous row for a total of 25 puff stitches in the row. Okay, coming up on my 25th puff stitch in row 4, going to join in the top of our first puff stitch and chain 1. Now for row 5, we're going to put our first puff stitch all the way over here in this chain 1 gap from row 4. Continue to put 1 puff stitch in each chain 1 gap around for a total of 25 puff stitches in the row. Okay, after we place our 25th puff stitch in the row, we're going to join into the top of our chain and chain 1. For row 6, we're going to put our first puff stitch right here in the chain 1 gap closest to our chain up 1. And continue putting 1 puff stitch in each chain 1 gap around, again for a total of 25 puff stitches in the row. Okay, putting our 25th puff stitch in the last chain 1 gap, join into the top of our first puff stitch and chain 1. For row 7, we are going to put our first puff stitch all the way over here in this chain 1 gap. Continue putting 1 puff stitch in each chain 1 gap all the way around for a total of 25 puff stitches in the row. This will be our last row that has 25 puff stitches, and then we will start our decreases and then close up this guy and our beanie will be finished. Coming up on our last puff stitch in the row, going to join in the top of our chain up here, and then we are going to chain 1. Now for row 8, we are going to start by putting a decrease over the very first 2 chain 1 gaps from the previous row. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. We're going to yarn over, insert our hook into the first chain 1 gap, grab our yarn, pull up a loop, do that 2 more times for a total of 3 in the gap instead of 4 like the previous rows. And then we're going to yarn over, insert our hook into the next gap, grab our yarn, pull up a loop for 3 times. That's 1, 2, 3. Then we're going to grab our yarn, pull through all the loops on our hook and chain 1 to secure it. That is a puff stitch decrease. Next, you're going to put 1 puff stitch in the next 1, 2, 3 chain 1 gaps. And that will be our repeat for the row. We will decrease and then puff 1, 2, 3, decrease 1, 2, 3, all the way around for a total of 20 stitches in the row. And then 3 puffs. That's 1. That's 2. And 3. I'm going to continue the repeat all the way around and then come back when we get near the end for a total of 25 puff stitches in the row. Okay, after we finish our last puff stitch in the row, we can join into the top of our first puff stitch, which was the puff stitch decrease. Now for row 9, we're going to start by putting a puff stitch in the first chain 1 gap all the way over here. And then we are going to puff stitch decrease over the next 2 chain 1 gaps, just like we did in the previous row. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, pull through all chain 1. And now we're going to start our repeat. So we're going to go decrease, puff stitch, puff stitch. Decrease, puff stitch, puff stitch. And you're going to repeat that all the way around for a total of 15 puff stitches in the row. Time for another decrease. And puff stitch, puff stitch. I will come back when I get to the end of the row and we will get started on the next row. I am back around to the end of the row, and my repeat says after a decrease I do puff stitch, but I only have 1 chain 1 gap left, so I'm just going to put 1 puff stitch instead of 2, and then that'll give me 15 puff stitches in the row. Join into the top over here and chain 1. For row 10, we're going to puff stitch decrease over the first 2 chain 1 gaps. And then we are going to put a puff stitch over here in the next chain 1 gap. And that will be our repeat for the row, just decrease, puff stitch, decrease, puff stitch, all the way around for a total of 10 stitches in the row. Once we get back around to the front of the row, we're going to join into the top of our first stitch, which was a puff stitch decrease, and chain 1. For row 11, we're going to puff stitch decrease all the way around for a total of 5 stitches, starting in these 2 chain 1 gaps. So you'll be reaching over this guy and using these 2 right here for your decrease. Continue to decrease in the next 2 chain 1 gaps all the way around until you get 5 total puff stitch decreases in the row. This is our last puff stitch row. We are almost done. Okay, now we're going to join into the top of our chain right here and chain 1. Now for row 12, we're going to single crochet 1 time in each stitch around for a total of 10 single crochet stitches in the row. I like to put my single crochet stitches actually into the stitch, if you can see that, and not just around the stitch like that. I think that's just personal preference. It would probably look fine if you went around the stitch too. That is up to you. After we get our 10 single crochets on here real quick, we will close up our circle, sew in our ends, and then have a cute toddler size baby Claire beanie. Okay, join into the top of our first single crochet and cut our yarn, leaving a tail long enough for sewing closed our circle. I will be using a tapestry needle and the magic close technique to close my little circle up here. So I will thread my tapestry needle. To do the magic close, we're going to insert our needle under the front loop of the first stitch and then twist it around and pick up the front loop of the second stitch, leaving those back loops just to hang out back there. Whipping it around, picking up the third front loop, whipping it around, picking up the fourth front loop, and then we're just going to pull through and continue to pick up all of the front loops for the 10 stitches and pulling your yarn through. And as you pull it through, you will see the circle begin to close very nice and neatly. Then I just like to run my needle underneath all 10 of those loops one more time, just so it's extra secure. Okay, and then after I get back around, I like to push my needle into the inside of the beanie, and I will flip my beanie inside out and finish sewing my tail in on the inside, still using my tapestry needle for that. And I'll just go back and forth over a bunch of stitches, making sure to cross back over where I've already been so it'll get good and knotted up under there, under all those stitches, and I know that my tail will not pop out and scare my customers into thinking their new beanie is falling apart. After you get your tail sewn in, you can snip that yarn, and since this piece is still pretty long, I will use it to sew a tag on the front of my beanie, and I will link how I do that. I have a video for it and I will link it below for you guys, so you can check out that video if you'd like. Oops. Sew in my last tail and then we are all done. Okie dokie. And let's take some measurements of our finished toddler size baby Claire Beanie. This guy measures 7.5 inches tall and 8.5 inches wide. And now we can compare this size to our other baby Claire Beanies since this is the last one. Hopefully I can get them all to fit here in one frame. So this is the toddler size, 12 to 24 month size, 6 to 12 month size, 3 to 6 months, and then our tiny little 0 to 3 month size. That is all of the baby Claire Beanies. And again, there is an adult and child size version on my blog as well, which is linked below. I hope you guys love all of these baby Claire Beanies. I have loved seeing them on my Instagram feed. You guys come up with some super awesome color combinations and different palm combinations. They're just all so pretty and I love seeing them. Thank you so much for tagging me in your pictures. It really does mean the world to me. I hope you guys have a fabulous rest of the day, and I will see you next time.